pictured I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentating better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
I know that I gotta stay away from all your games. Yeah, I know that I found somebody else to love me one day. Yeah, you'll realize the grass ain't greener on the other side. No, you did me dirty for the last time, so now I gotta say goodbye. So now I gotta say goodbye.
Yeah, my life is lovely now, I'm focused on me. You said you were about to die, I guess the car is on E. But see, I ain't even tripping, cause I just chose to believe that somebody gon' come around and give me just what I need. I don't wanna see you frowning, see you looking down and out. Coming to me crying, saying you miss having me around. Gave you chances and you blew it, you so easily influenced. All the times you told me beat it, now you gotta face the music, I'm saying
I know that I gotta stay away from all your games. Yeah, I know that I found somebody else to love me one day. Yeah, you'll realize the grass ain't greener on the other side. No, you did me dirty for the last time, so now I gotta say goodbye. So now I gotta say goodbye.
I've been running, running, running away from you. I've been trying, trying, trying to keep my cool. I see but your colors shining, shining through. Yeah, I do, that I do. Is it too much to ask? I don't want you back. I don't want you back. Is it too much to ask? I don't want you back. I don't want you back. No matter the distance I cover, you always there to smother. Please let me find another. Feels like you're my silhouette. I'm not easy to forget. Pretend that we never met. I've been running, running, running away trying to keep my cool. I see what your colors shining through. Yeah, I do. Well, that I do. Is it too much to ask? I don't want you back. I don't want you back. Is it too much to ask? I don't want you back. I don't want you back. I know it's been a while. I know you're thinking the same, but I've been feeling like a moment can't go to waste. I let go of your name, girl. I figured that was it. I stopped playing your game, girl. Yeah, I thought I could quit. I'm all up in my head, I'm sorry for what I did. Wish I could have it unsaid. Just make it right instead of treating me like I'm dead. Is it too late to
G'day. Welcome to PowerShell 101 Live with Michael. I'm Michael, obviously. And today is our PowerShell 101 Live with the internet. So today we're going to be doing lots and lots of cool stuff with internet stuff. So interacting with the internet, understanding how HTTP works, things like that. So strap yourselves in. A lot to learn today in PowerShell 101 Live. But yeah, and I hope you guys take something home from this. It is 6:05 in the morning here in Brisbane, and we are doing this a little early this morning since I have to be out the door at 0800 because I am going to my parents' place. So yeah, we've got that obviously going. So let's get stuck into it. Obviously, I can kill my timer. We are running release candidate 1 on PowerShell 7. I just want to quickly run things. Yeah, okay, it was running scripts, so that should be fine. There was issues with running scripts within my work machine just due to the fact that I have network drives and things like that. But that all aside, we are good. We're exceptionally good. So let's get stuck into it. We've got a lot of demos to get to do today, so there's a few things there. Got some cool stuff as well. So we're going to be doing Philips Hue. So I've got some Philips Hue in the background. So we're going to be working with REST with Philips Hue. Some other really cool things there as well. So really interesting lessons for especially for people who don't fully understand why there's REST capabilities and SOAP capabilities and all those kinds of HTTP based tools within PowerShell. Anyway, so a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to be suppressing. I'm just being conscious of time. I'm going to be suppressing the recap, so we're going to go straight into the dirty stuff this week. So this week we're just going to be going straight in. So there's going to be no recap. So today we're just going to be looking at PowerShell and the internet. We're going to be then have a bit of a break for 5 minutes. We're going to be looking at REST. We're going to have another break for 5 minutes, and then we're going to be looking at SOAP. So you guys are going to be like, what is he talking about? So we will definitely be talking about what is REST, what is SOAP, and we'll actually go into understanding why. Now, the one thing I did do is when I wrote the demos on Thursday night, with the SOAP demos just being forward now, the guy hasn't updated his endpoint. So to update to support the latest version of SSL and TLS. So basically we can't get a workable image, but the thing is that we can still actually send a request to him via SOAP. So just FYI, that's why that's happening. Like I said, all lesson plans, all those kinds of goodies, all have homework. If you want to learn something, you can actually do it yourself. So I've set myself a bit of a challenge, which is basically to create automate the following. So essentially build a script that can basically build a VM, which installs Windows 10. We've covered that in the code, so you guys can just basically get stuck right into that. And then basically install OBS version 24 and then install VS Code. So yeah, so that's pretty straightforward, very easy to do. That might be a little bit harder. This will definitely help today. So understanding how the REST works, but understanding how the HTTP works, and understanding how to use Invoke-WebRequest, we can actually achieve these steps today. So all the steps that you'll then be taught will be pretty much be able to actually automate this entire process. So the next thing I need to do before I go any further is we need to actually make sure everyone's if everyone wants the PowerShell slides and all those kinds of goodies, they can jump on there and grab them. So I'm just going to quickly jump in the Discord channel and we will paste the slides. No, that's the wrong one. Here are the slides. So you guys can just jump on that OneDrive URL link. That's basically, I'm constantly updating that. That's actually the source. Once this is over, essentially that will be pushed into Git, but I just haven't had the time to do that at the moment yet. So yeah, once that course is complete, we'll basically upload everything into Git. So yeah, let's get stuck into it. So PowerShell and the internet. So essentially, one of the really important things about PowerShell is that basically it can communicate with HTTP endpoints. So essentially, what is really important about that is the fact that PowerShell is able to leverage automation over the web. That's really what its intended goal is. You can actually leverage automation over the web. So PowerShell, it can be done via web page or web service API. So that's using REST or that's using SOAP. So if you're basically using any of that, like it can generally just use those. Now there will be other third-party ones that you can tack on, but out of the box you generally just have REST and SOAP. And like I said, it really allows you to leverage your your automation third-party APIs. And this is really quite powerful, especially within PowerShell, because ultimately what your goal is if you are writing PowerShell code and you are automating, which really, this is where my kind of area of expertise of automation is, um, it you generally will have to communicate with a HTTP endpoint at some stage. And it's just really good to understand that basically communicating with a HTTP endpoint doesn't require it requires a basic understanding of HTTP, how it works, how all those kinds of bits and pieces, but it's not something that you need to fully, have a great understanding just to get working and out of the get working. I do have to admit, this is a lot of trial and error, which I had to struggle through. So you guys will be learning the lessons that I have learned just from natively. So that's obviously really cool for you guys. But essentially, PowerShell really is going to be those third-party API. It allows you to leverage those third-party API platforms. So a good example is if you've got like Twilio, if you've got Twilio, which is a text messaging service, and you want to send a text messaging service, you can do that. PowerShell Azure Functions supports HTTP endpoints, so Azure Functions is serverless code within Azure. Even Azure Automation Runbook, you can basically trigger a runbook via a webhook, which essentially is just a URL endpoint that you can hit with PowerShell, and you can basically plug in the parameters within your webhook, and then basically you'll trigger the runbook. Now, within the automation runbook, for example, you can't do many things in terms of you can't actually fetch the content back. So there's within an automation runbook, usually if the way that they've designed it, it's more for those once-off triggers. So you need to just go and do something. But in terms of what it can leverage is a lot of cool things. And as a practical example, there was a product out there which I was called at my work, I can't remember, it was a chat product, and essentially what they the business wanted me to do was automate a way to be able to actually have our clients automatically put that I think it was put the court in record remotely. And there was an API endpoint that we could interact with, and so hypothetically that entire process was possible, and you could actually leverage Azure Functions to be able to do that with some little tricky stuff to be able to kind of tack onto our little applet. So it's something that's really quite it's something that's really quite cool with regards to obviously being able to actually leverage that. So rather than actually having an instant messenger person, you can actually just have a person log in, and then basically they say, hey, I want to start that process. So that's pretty much yeah, PowerShell on the internet. It's pretty powerful stuff. So HTTP, let's go. We're going to do a quick rundown of actual HTTP itself. I think having an understanding of HTTP also helps you fully understand why we do things the way we do things. So, for example, within SOAP or within REST or within even Invoke-WebRequest. So, essentially, HTTP is a request response protocol. In the links you're going to see, this is just literally Wikipedia. But essentially, you guys obviously are familiar with HTTP. It runs over the internet, but essentially under the hood, it's just request response application. You send a request for the server to send a response. That's it. So when you go to google.com, you're sending a request. Hey, I want the HTML body of Google, and Google will go, yep, okay, sure, here you go. And that's pretty much it. So it's just request response. There's not really much else. It can definitely vary in terms of like video streaming and things like that, but essentially the premise is the fact that it's just request response. The client's running an application, and the client can run an application, whether it's a browser, whether it's a PowerShell, whether it's curl, which is the equivalent of Invoke-WebRequest and Invoke-REST method. And then you obviously have a server, and the server's running the web server. Now the server generally runs PHP, IIS, Apache, Tomcat, any kind of generic HTTP service. Most obviously HTTP ports are port 80, port 8080, port 443. You might see the very odd one 3124, which is basically very odd. I haven't seen that for many years. Essentially, they're your common ports. When you obviously type in, by default, everything defaults to port 80 and then 8080. Oh, and I forgot 8081. So when you request content through a HTTP endpoint, so if you say, hey, I want to, with Google, let's say we're connecting to Google, we can actually use request methods. Now, request methods actually describe the action. So essentially what you're doing there is when you say, I want to go to google.com and I want to have a look at its, I want google.com to service me with its web page. Essentially, I'm doing a HTTP GET. And essentially what I'm saying is, get me all the content. I just want to see the content. That's it. I'm not interested in anything else. Now, you can do other things with that, but essentially a get is literally relatively basic. You have posts. Posts are really used for creation of things or logging in. So when you're logging in, most of the time you're going to basically posting back to the web server. You have other ones like patch and put, which is generally they're one and the same within the REST world, but generally they can vary from different functions. And then finally you have delete. So if you want to go ahead and delete something, you would basically put in your request method to delete. So it's fairly straightforward in terms of what's actually available out there in terms of the request methods. There are a few more there, and you can also have your custom. You can actually have custom request methods, but we'll kind of skip on that for the now because I don't particularly want to overcomplicate this. Now, one of the really cool things is with HTTP is that obviously you can see down the bottom there we've got the what I call. I just got a bit of a demo of a URI. URL. But essentially, you have resources identified using URLs based on the URI scheme. So essentially, you can have a URI. You can have a URL, and the URL determines how or what resources you're wanting to access on your on that specific server. I'm just going to quickly drag out some key pointers here. I'm going to break out my highlighter. So obviously we've got our scheme, which is HTTP. So there are many types. You've got HTTP, you've got FTP, you've got HTTPS, you've got SCP. There are many different types. Most common is HTTP. That's really the one we just need to focus on. Obviously, you've got user info, or what we call the authority. User info. Now, you can pass user info into it, but we're not really interested in that. So I'm going to kind of just remove that. That's not something that we really you really generally see. You can pass user info directly into a HTTP URL. Strongly recommend not doing it. It's not the best way to do things. Then you have your host. Now, obviously, your host, google.com. Most common thing following that is :port, so you can determine what kind of port that web server is hosting on. So you can hit a custom port, whether it's, like I said. You don't generally have to worry about if it's running on, anything outside the common standard. So anything outside 8080, 8081, 80, 443, God forbid 3124. But essentially, most browsers are going to be smart enough to go, okay, I'm just going to try all these ports just natively off the bat. Obviously, with custom firewalls and things like that, and when you've got custom web services on, network devices out in your local environment, they are hosted on your different ports. So, for example, my UTM is hosted on port 10,000. Where my old UTM, also my XG is hosted on 10,000. My old UTM was hosted on 4444. But essentially, again, you can basically host different ports, so you're not just constrained to those ones. Now, we won't really talk about domain matching, but essentially you can have multiple domains running on the same port. So you could have google.com, you could have michael.com, you could have steve.com, and they could all be running on port 80, all forwarding, and you can basically have your web server determined between them. But this is not a server side. This is just a client side talk. Obviously, a path. So when you go google.com/login/ which is obviously going to log into your Gmail suite, that's your path. The path basically determines what endpoint you want to talk to and how you want to integrate with it. That's really it. So obviously, we need paths to be able to describe different actions. That's really what the path is. Really useful. And then we have a query. Now, queries are really quite handy. You can see here it's basically denoted by a question mark. Question marks are generally will denote, hey, I'm a query URL string, and then you can basically denote it's followed by a key value. Once that pair has been described, you use the AND key. The AND character to describe a new key value. So the AND character is a new key value. It's a new. And then we have order equals newest, and then we have top. Now, and top's basically just a fragment. Not really going to worry about fragments. The big ones you really need to worry about is obviously scheme, host, port, path, and query. These are really the ones you're going to be using most of the time, just as a bit of an introduction. So that's basically a really basic rundown of HTTP. So we are going to go and break it down a little bit further. So I talked a little bit about that. So obviously URI, it's a key, which is just the universe resource identifier. Now we're going to talk about HTTP headers. So when you send a HTTP request to an endpoint, in that HTTP request it has a specific structure. Each HTTP request has a structure. So in that structure, you're going to have a header. You're going to have obviously a URL or a URI. I'm just going to say URI. You're going to have a body. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else I might? Yeah, and you need a request method. Now, essentially, what the header does is the header is basically used to describe key value pairs that describe the parameters of the HTTP request. So, for instance, if you've got a HTTP header of you've got content type application JSON, the body that you're sending to them or what you expect to receive is JSON. The header describes, it can describe authentication, it can describe many different things, but essentially what it's doing is it's just describing to the server, how should I read this request? It's giving them all the information that it needs. The body is basically the body of the data that you're sending to them. So the body could be login information, it could literally be a file, it could be an image, it can be whatever it needs to be. The body is basically where you are literally just sending data. That's the data bytes. That's basically your payload as per se. Then you have your request method. Like I said, the request method describes the level of request that's performed. So obviously we talked about get, which is read, put update, which is update replace, post is create, delete, which is delete, patch is partial update modify. And then you have this, and that's really pretty much it. Now, when you're actually getting content back from the server, now the server, when it returns content, it's going to return a status code. Status code basically is just a simple codes that tell the client the status of the message. So rather than actually kind of working it out, essentially you have that code to actually validate it. So generally, the general approach is anything in the 200s is okay. So if you've got a 200, everything's good in the world. Request is good. You have a 300, which is usually classified as a redirect. 300 is a redirect because you've got a permanent redirect from the server's got a redirect from that site to go here, which is the 300s. 400s are client errors. So the most common is obviously error 404, resource could not be found. A lot of people kind of think that means the server's not working. No, that's not the case. So you obviously have 403, which is forbidden. So anything with error 403 is generally forbidden. 407, proxy authentication. So if you've got a proxy server sitting in between you and your endpoint, which is basically for most corporate networks, that's going to be the case. And they actually, most of them are non-transparent, which basically means they require a file called a WPAC file, which needs to be loaded onto your browser to be able to talk to the proxy server. Otherwise, no juice. So obviously you got error 407, which is proxy authentication. And then you have error 401, which is forbidden, requires authentication. So there's a whole bunch of different status codes out there. I'm not going to go through all of them because we'll be here all day. But essentially, the rule of thumb is just think of 200s are fine, 300s are redirect, 400s are bad. 500s, I can't remember which 500. I think they are server errors. But essentially, you kind of really, what you're looking for is anything that's not a 200. You kind of got to start looking at why it's not that. Whether it's a redirect or whether it's not, that's that. So that's basically a really, really brief breakdown of HTTP. We're now actually going to do an example. So I've just got a simplified HTTP process. This is not 100% accurate because at the end of the day, though, I don't particularly want to have to write all the headers that's required to actually send to Google. So I've just kind of got a simplified version so that everyone can kind of understand exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to the way that things work with HTTP. So let's get started. First thing we've got here is we've got our client. This is Joe. Whoops, no, I lost my pen. There we go. Oh, no, I just hit a scroll. Let's try and bring that back. Let's get a pen. So we've got our client here. This is Joe. I'm going to call him Joe. And we've got Steve for the server. We've got Joe and Steve. So Joe basically wants to go to Google, and Steve is actually hosting the hosting the web server for Google. Which is kind of funny though, because obviously Steve Jobs. But anyway, so essentially, Joe here is now on his client, and he's got a client, and he's running Mozilla Firefox. So essentially, he's got his Mozilla Firefox, and he's going to go into his browser, and he's going to go www.google.com. And what the browser is going to do, it's going to package that up, and it's basically going to package that up into a nice little HTTP request. So this is just a simplified version of those requests. I'm not going to go into, like I said, not too much detail, but we can kind of get a bit of an idea here. So we've got google.com, and inside there he's got basically the headers. We've got in there he's encoded the agent type. I'm a browser. I'm a specific type of browser. And the agent type basically says, it actually describes to the web server what type of browser you are, whether you're Mozilla, whether you're Safari, whether you're Google Chrome. That basically really describes in here. You can obviously put content type and all these other kinds of headers. We're just trying to keep things simple here. And notice that he's got a get. But notice there's one thing that's missing here, which is basically the body. When doing a GET request, you don't really need the body of a HTTP. Now you can with specific types of requests, a GET request, but as a premise, a GET request is literally as it is. You're just fetching content. You don't need to put anything in that content to go fetch it. Now there might be times when you do in terms of other things, but essentially that as a premise for keeping things simple, a GET request is literally fetching content. So he sends this content to the server. Now the server here over at Steve's side basically gets this request and goes, okay, I've gotten my request. We are good to go. We're going to go serve him up some content. He's basically serving content on the google.com resource. There's no path or anything, so we're just going to serve him the content from that specific resource with the default path. So there's no issues with the server. So what he's going to do is he's going to craft a HTTP response. Now, HTTP, remember, it can run over TCP, it can run over UDP, but essentially, I just kind of want to make sure that we're just not going to be talking about that network, we're just kind of abstracting that away. So essentially, he's sending this response back, and then he's going to be sending it back in a header. He's going to send the HTTP version, and he's going to send the HTTP status code. So the HTTP version could be HTTP 1.1, it could be HTTP 1.0. There are minute differences between them, but for this, we're not going to be interested in that. So he's going to be sending a HTTP body. Now, as you can see in that body, you can see he's got some HTML code. Obviously, this is very basic HTML code. It's just literally HTML. But essentially, he's just sending a body back. Now, what's going to happen from a client side when that request gets sent back? Essentially, that is now going to render to the page. It's going to render the screen. So you're going to see a nice, Google kind of response. That's essentially what's going to happen. Now, let's say he's going to now click on the login button, and he actually wants to log in. So, what's going to happen here is, okay, so let's say he's clicked on the login button. So the same process is applied, and now he wants to log in. He's basically logging into his Gmail. So what's going to happen here is we have the client. So essentially, you can see it's pretty much exactly the same, with the exception that obviously you got the URI, you got the headers, agent type browser, and method post. Now I've actually made one boo-boo here, and I actually do need to fix this boo-boo. Just go my annotations, and the one thing I didn't include is the body. Now in the body, he could actually have something like, I'm just going to go user, what's his name? John. We're just going to go John. This is literally not what's it's going to look like. It's a little different, but we're just going to say something. We'll just call it pass to keep things on one line. And we're just going to say 1, 2, 3. So essentially, if we go back into here, you can see he's now sending in the body the information that's required to actually log on. So we've got the method of the post there, and then we've got the body. Now, the important thing is to note the method. So he's actually using a post here versus a get in the first time. So essentially here saying, hey, I'm trying to send you some info. You need to actually read it. And what's going to happen here is he'll send that to the server. Now, the server's going to read it, and it's going to make a determination whether that is a legitimate request or not. Now, whether if it's a legitimate request, it might respond back with a status 200 saying, hey, here's some HTML. It might not. Let's say he doesn't actually have a valid request. It might actually send back a 401 or a 403. And saying in the body of the HTML saying, invalid login, username, password failed, those kinds of things. So essentially, that's really how that process works as a simplified breakdown. If you guys got any questions, throw them in chat. That's fine. I'm happy to answer them. So yeah, we can definitely spend a few minutes going through that. But in terms of as a simplified, most basic process for you guys, that is literally HTTP at its simplest. All right. So browsing web pages. Within PowerShell, when we're browsing web pages, we can be using Invoke-WebRequest. Invoke-WebRequest is an excellent commandlet to use. It's very, very full-featured. It has a lot of cool things. Very first time I wrote it, I wrote a function out of it, which I needed to do to scrape Bureau of Meteorology images from the Bureau of Meteorology website, which is obviously weather website, and I was scraping radar images. I wrote this really cool function which you could just plug in a website and just go download those images. So obviously I wanted reusability, and my boss called it a porn crawler. So yeah, good start. But essentially, it really allows you to do automation on the web page, which is really, really quite handy. We're going to look at another demo today, which is one of the things I've been working on at the moment, which I'm scraping web information from stock trading forums and then running sentiment analysis on specific users. So you can do things like that. So we're going to obviously have a bit of a demo and a bit of a play around with that, but essentially that is really what Invoke-WebRequest is really all about. It's really there to be able to do those kinds of things. Now, initially when a little bit of trivia for you guys, when Invoke-WebRequest was initially published, what actually they did was Microsoft actually documented the process of logging into Facebook using Invoke-WebRequest. That was subsequently removed in a couple of years later, since it didn't really work anymore. But it was kind of funny to note that, hey, you actually documented a process to log on to Facebook when you actually should have been doing some others. But whatever, it is what it is. It's all good. Anyway, so, and like I said, it's basically just a commandlet that can just get content from a web page. It's very, very fully featured. We are going to have a quick, I'm just going to take you through some theory first, and then we're going to go demo. We're going to do some demos. So essentially, we've got some common parameters. There are lots of parameters in Invoke-WebRequest. I'm only going to keep a couple of them because some of them you're not really going to use. Some of them you might. Some of them you might not. So obviously we've got the URI. So the URI obviously specifies the internet resource, so google.com, that kind of thing. You could obviously describe the method. So we've obviously talked about these things. You've got web session and session variable. Now, essentially, the web session references the second one. I should have flipped these around, but essentially when you specify this, we'll talk about session variable first before web session. Session variable essentially creates a cookie on your machine. It basically creates a session state on the within PowerShell, which you can reuse over and over again. So you don't necessarily have to worry about logging in over and over again. It helps you just have a quick cookie on your machine to do what you need to do. Web session is basically the opposite of that. It's the session variable is the process of creating it. Web session is the process of receiving it. So if you specify the session variable within and you give it a variable of cookie, then you basically just specify the variable cookie in web session, and it'll just automatically suck that cookie in and deal with it. Obviously, we have our headers. That's nothing new. We have the body. Again, this is nothing new. We have use basic parsing. Now, this is actually something which is really interesting. This was the standard within PowerShell 3, 4, and 5, deprecated in 6. So within the way that when PowerShell Invoke-WebRequest worked in pre-PowerShell 6, essentially it would be using Internet Explorer's engine to actually assist in the process with it. The problem is when it used the engine, you would get the weirdest pop-up. It was very difficult to automate. You might get a pop-up saying, hey, this site's not secure. Do you want to continue? Like, yes, I want to continue. Or you might have hey, this site uses cookies. Do you want to continue? And the last thing you want to do is be able to actually click on something. This is PowerShell. We're not supposed to be clicking on anything. We're supposed to be having a 100% automation experience. And so in 6, they've actually dropped the support, which is I think is the best thing they've ever done, because at the end of the day, though, it just made so much sense to just go back to the basic process of running a HTTP request. I want to send a request. I want to get a response. I don't want Internet Explorer touching things. I don't want any of that shenanigans. So that's really there. Content type. So content type is a commandlet, which essentially it's just it is literally a header, but essentially they've added it as a parameter. It allows you to specify the content type of a web request. So essentially, when you're specifying content type, you're describing to the endpoint how it's to read the body of that request. Now, by default, it's the application. The default is application form URL encoded, which basically means have a look. Either look at the URL or look at the URL encoding on the actual. It's URL encoded within the body. There's nothing really special about that. But the biggest thing is that we're going to see in subsequent examples with SOAP and REST, we're going to be using XML, we're going to be using JSON, we're going to be using, you can use whatever you want, you can make up your own standards. It is what it is. Encoding really is important. So when you're sending a REST request and you're getting XML back, you most likely need to change the content type and specify, hey, I want to be explicit with this, and I want it to be application JSON. And most web services are happy to oblige. And then you have those few rogue ones that all they do is XML, and then you go, okay, even if I'm explicit, it means that there's no functionality there. Out file. So out file is really just used to actually save the body of the request. So we generally use out file to save the file. If you want to download a file, you can use out file to do it, and you can download anything with it. There was a bit of a write-up previously by a guy which looked at the performance impact of out file versus the native .NET methods. Out file, it can be a little slow because obviously the way that Invoke-WebRequest works is it does scraping initially in your code. So when you do Invoke-WebRequest, it'll hunt out all the images, all the links, all the forms, all those kinds of stuff out of the HTML for you. And so because of that, that's just compute overhead that obviously you don't need, especially when you're just trying to save a file. Obviously proxy and proxy credentials. So you can optionally specify the proxy server with the proxy credential. I generally don't really do this. I actually generally just, when I'm in my code, I'm up front with my script, I'll set the default proxy configuration for everything. So I don't never ever have to specify it. It's just done. So it's so much easier to do it that way, because then basically, yeah, once it's done, it's done. And this is the one thing, again, it catches people out so many times with, I can't access this HTTP endpoint. What kind of error am I getting? And you're getting a status code of, you know, a 304, something along those lines. Most likely, if you're within an organization, assume without doubt that you basically have an authenticated proxy. Now, there are some organizations out there that will have transparent proxies. Works naturally with transparent proxies, because transparent proxies don't care. All they care about is the traffic and the web response. Obviously, if you're going to a dodgy site and a dodgy API, it might have a bit of a, it'll have a whinge about that, and you will get errors. But essentially, transparent proxies are not going to have issues, where non-transparents will. So that's our common parameters. So it's demo time. So let's go and have a look at Invoke-WebRequest. So let's go here. We're going to go Invoke-WebRequest. So we've got a bit of a demo here. So what we're going to do, oh, I've got Let's Browse Google, and then I've got DuckDuckGo, lol. So essentially what we've got here is we're just going to look at a basic URL request. We're not doing anything special. Let me just zoom in this code so you guys can see. There we go. Let's zoom this code in. Just let me know if that's alright. I'm just going to quickly check the stream and make sure that you guys can actually see that fine. Let me just flick it to 1080, because we actually need to see non-pixels. Yep, that looks good. Looks really good. Sweet. So essentially here we have Invoke-WebRequest. So let's go ahead and run it. Very basic. Let me get rid of this old shenanigans, and let's drag this bad boy up. So let's actually let's have a look at what we got. So we've just gone to duckduckgo.com. Let's go have a look at the result. So as you can see here in the result, we've got a lot of good stuff in here. So you can see here we've got our status code. We've got a status code of 200. Everything's good in the hood. We're sweet. We've got we also have a status description of OK. Again, that's a nice easy way of saying, hey, I'm all good in the hood. We've got content. So content, again, it's just showing you the content. We've got raw content, which again, that's the same thing. I think this one also, this one also includes the HTTP headers. So let's go ahead and just quickly just pull them out. So again, you can see status description, which is okay. We've got content. There's all our HTML. This is pretty straightforward, which is really cool. We can actually do something with that in a moment. And we've got raw content. So again, it's all our HTML. I think this also includes header information. Yes, it includes header information. So you can see all the headers. You can see the server, we can see the date, connection, berries, all those little bits and pieces. And this is literally just header information. We can see our headers. Here's all our headers, which is, again, we saw that in raw content, but there's our headers. It's pretty straightforward. You can see here's a lot of random things. We've got content length, content type. So you can see it's text HTML, and the char set's UTF-8. So we're encoded in UTF-8, which is really good. It tells the browser that. And obviously, it's just static text HTML. And we've got some other bits and pieces here, which we don't really need to be concerned about. Obviously, yeah, that's pretty much your headers. Input fields. So you can see here we've got a whole bunch of input fields that Invoke-WebRequest has scraped. We can actually interact with these. It's kind of gotten broken in. It's a little broken. It doesn't. Back in the day, the way that you'd actually use the forms. So I'm not fully across how this fully works, and I can't actually input data into this because it's missing the key input field that I need, which is the search box. So it's a bit of a pain. I've got the search button, I've got search clear, but I don't actually have search input field, which, yeah, if someone can tell me that'd be great. I've got an input field there, but that's not for, that's to clear the search. So anyway, and then we have links, and again, you can rip out all your links. So you can see here we've got our relative links here. So it's just specifying some relative links. We've got our about page and things like that. And you can actually use that. We can actually go ahead and go around and browse things. So that's pretty much the basic of Invoke-WebRequest. But before we go any further, let's actually have some fun here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do two things. First thing we're going to do is we're going to actually grab the HTML, and we're going to actually just save it out, and we're going to go view it. So let's go and do that. Let's go and do that first. So we're going to grab the content. So here's our content. There's a HTML, and we're just going to pop that to out file. And we're just going to go path, and we're going to go, let's just go demo, DuckDuckGo. We're going to have to keep this quite short because PowerShell VS Code has issues with multi-lines. So let's go result content, out file, and we're just going to go DuckGo.html. So here we go. Let's go have a look at it. And revealing Explorer, and we're going to browse to it. So here you go. We have pretty much that's it. Under the hood, it looks pretty basic because it really is. Actually, that intrigues me. So this is the thing that I was talking about. So I've just did an expect element, and I'm looking at this specific text box, and you can see there there's an ID of search form input homepage. Let's see if that's there. I didn't think that was there. So if we go input fields, yeah, search for input clear, search for button homepage, search clear, search button. Yeah, so it's not there. So something's not right. That's all right. And then let's have a look at the links. So we've got, I think I'm actually doing that down here. Yeah, I am, but we can do it again. So let's grab the first link. You can see here. Let's go to the about page. So let's do some PowerShelly. We're gonna go. Let's browse some links. So let's the about page. Let's just call it the about page to make things a little bit easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to go invoke REST method. Invoke web request. We're going to go URI, and then we're going to go result.links. And we're just going to go -1, which is -1 is say get me the last item, which is about. And we're also going to need to concatenate this. So what we're going to do is just do some quick basic string concatenation. We're going to do a string format concatenation. And we're going to go https //doc.go.com. You can see there's already a slash, so that should be fine. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, yep, we've got links, yep, okay, so because we've specified the object itself, we need to actually go one step further, and we need to go href, specify href property, which is my boo-boo, and we've run it. So we can actually then dump that out, and we've got a new response, and you can see here, we've got a response of 200, status is okay, and we can actually have a look at its content. So that's pretty much it. Now, one of the things that's really important about, I actually forgot to mention, is when we're downloading HTML, you're not downloading any images associated with that. You're literally just downloading the HTML. So unless it can actually reference those images via the internet, that's all you're getting. You're literally getting static HTML. Very, very important to remember that. Okay, so that's pretty much that demo. Let's go and have a look at another demo. So here I've got PowerShell 7 preview 1 in our as a parameter block hash table declared, and it's just preview 1. I just went and grabbed the first preview, and we've specified an out file here of dtemp. I'm just going to make sure there's nothing in dtemp. Temp. Cool. So what we've got here is essentially we've got a URL, and we're going to go ahead and download that file. So we're using the out file parameter here, and we're just going to go ahead and run that. So I'm going to put that in the memory, and let's go ahead and run that. So you can see it's running. That's actually downloading the file. So if we actually go ahead and have a look at dtemp while it's happening, you can see there it is downloading, and it's just waiting for that download to complete. Now, one of the really cool things about PowerShell is that, like, this is just things that you can think about in terms of automating, is think of it like one of the ideas I had was having a PowerShell script literally that runs in the background. You can literally have it running in the background, and you just register an event, which is the file system watcher event for the downloads directory for your computer. And so what happens is any file that you download, you might just want to send it to VirusTotal. So if it's under 30 meg, you know, hey, it's an executable, you know, you can just send it to VirusTotal, and you just upload it via API, send it to VirusTotal. It might have a hash. If it has a hash, fantastic. You don't have to upload the file, but if it doesn't, then you might need to. But essentially, you want to do a quick virus check. Hey, is it safe? If it's not, delete it. And so you can write a really, really, really basic virus checker, which could probably save you a lot of heartache just by using PowerShell and a bit of REST, and a file system watcher event. So again, that's really the cool parts of PowerShell. So as you can see here, it's downloaded. Let's go ahead and look at it. So obviously we can open, there's PowerShell. That's how we download files with Invoke-WebRequest. So that's pretty much that. So let's, in our previous script, we had the our previous image. I think it was an image download. I think it was just a link browser. Oh no, it was an image list. It didn't download it. It just provided a list of images. So what we had here was we had a whole bunch of functions that we wrote, which essentially used Invoke-WebRequest to scour one level deep. Is it one level? I think it was one level deep. Yeah, I think it was one level deep. So essentially, let's go ahead and run this. Let's go run this. Drop this in memory. I think there is a bug with this. Let's just hit Google because I think there was a bug with this. So essentially, we can go ahead and run that. And while that's running, let's actually think. So what's this doing? Is this is just scraping out the This is scraping out all the images from Google, and it's just basically going, I think it's going one URL deep. That's it. And so this is just a nice little piece of code that can do it. So while we're waiting for that to come back, we might as well go through the code again. So we've got two functions here. We've got format absolute URL and we've got get URL links. Format absolute URL basically converts relative paths into absolutes. So it just makes it a lot easier when dealing with any sort of Invoke-WebRequest. If you have an absolute, you don't have to deal with anything. So I can just pass it through this and it just makes it so. And then obviously we have our main function here, which basically we can see we've hit our initial URL, which is defined in the parameter. And then you can see it's going through each of the links and using the href property, and it's basically formatting the URL. Once it's formatted those URLs, it's then basically hitting those URLs, going Invoke-WebRequest with the URI, and then it's digging out those specific links. Actually, I think it's digging out links. It's not doing images. I think it's just doing links. Yeah, it's a previous URL link. It's not. It doesn't pull images out. And so you can see that it pulls out the links, and then what it does is then it combines them. So we can see here it's combining the links. I've just got an array there. Not the best way of doing it in terms of declaring a declaration of an array, but it's for the time being it'll work. And then basically we need to now convert all that information into absolute URL paths. We're not interested in having relatives. So essentially it will then take all that and then basically convert that. So obviously for each object we're iterating through all the combined links that we've created, and then basically it creates a custom object with the original URL and then the enumerated URL, which is an absolute path. And then it will return that object back to the parent, and which is the pipeline. And now if we scroll up, we should see a big old list, which we do here. So you can see these are all the lists from Google, which is, I think it's one URL deep. So you can see there's a lot there. There's a lot of URLs in there. And that's just a really basic way of doing it. And we ran out of space off the top of the screen. So yeah, cool. So that's pretty much that demo. If you've got questions, like I said, just start throwing them in the chat. We are running a little late, but we've still got a bit of time. Now, the final demo that I kind of wanted to take you through was doing a basic amount of web scraping within Invoke-WebRequest. Now, this is not a lot because I kind of ran out of time. And also, I've got another demo later, which I kind of want to show you guys in terms of how actually we can do web scraping properly. So essentially here we have, we're going to be using Windows Update Catalog. So let's firstly have a quick look at it. Let's have actually a browse. We'll go browse to it first. First thing to know, it's an ASP.NET website, but obviously noted by the ASP.X page. So this is the Windows Update Catalog. Okay, sweet. What we can actually notice is that we do have some input fields here, things like that. So we can see here, I've gone and inspected my HTML, so I've just hit F12, and I just want to have a look at some of the search text boxes here. So you can see here we've got an ID of search text box, and then we've got a button right next to it, which is called search button box, right there. There you are, and there's an event associated with that. It's a JavaScript event. So, and that's pretty much that. Cool. That's nice and easy. Now we've obviously, let's actually go ahead and try it. Let's work out what it does. So if we go ahead and hit search, note that basically for us to search, we're actually appending that it's just going to search.asp.x, and it's just appending the query, and it's appending a Q as a key within the query string, and then the value, which is ASD. Sweet. Well, guess what? We don't actually have to go hunting inside the input forms. We can actually just go query the URL directly that way. You don't need to basically make things overly complicated, especially when you're scraping. You basically want to keep it as simple as possible. So let's actually go ahead and sort that. So the next thing we're going to do is we can actually go ahead and search that. So let's use KB. Let's use this KB. So I'm just going to quickly go ahead and pump that in. This is a known knowledge base Windows 8.1 patch. I just chose it because it was the very first one that we had. So essentially what we can do here is let's actually go and hit that. So what I've done is I've modified the search request like we said, and basically now we're actually browsing that specific query string. Now if we actually have a look back at the update catalog, you can see here we've got a lot more info, we've got a lot more forms, we've got links. So if we're going to have a look at our links, see we've got a whole bunch of JavaScript voids, so we've got a whole bunch of events. We've got a lot of good stuff in here. So essentially we have a lot of good, like there's scrapable information out of here that we can use. Now if we go update catalog and we scroll up, you can see again we've got a status code of 200. We are fine. So let's actually have a look at that HTML, and so let's dump it out. So I've dumped it out to temp. Let's have a look at it. There you go. And that's basically the HTML that it's dumped out. So you can see here, we actually can see that information, and we can actually get this information out. So if we wanted to get this specific patch, we could actually do that. Now, for the sake of time, we are running a little bit out of time, and I kind of didn't have time to write the demo, but essentially we can. Now, I'm going to show you a demo. I'm just going to open up code again, and then I just need to make a quick change to actually make sure that, just to remove some code, because I do have a key in there. I'm actually going to show you a web scraper that I have written that I've kind of like. This is still in the creation stage, so it's not really finished, but it gives you a bit of an idea of what the dealio is going on there. I just want to make sure that I don't have anything for sentiment. I'm just going to say, hey, this is not the key. Like so. Cool. So let's have a squiz. So this is there's a website out there called Hot Copper. Let's actually firstly browse Hot Copper. Now, Hot Copper is basically a stock trading platform. You can see there's a lot of cool information about stock trading there. And we can do things. So we're just going to choose a random thing. So we've got, let's just choose this one. We've got an ASX stock of FMS. They're not doing too badly, to be honest. I'm just having a look at their stock prices. They're actually not too bad at the moment. They're a bit of a slump, but we'll just wait till them to bottom out and then you can buy in. I do expect it to fall down here though. I was looking at it, I'm like, yeah, I expect it to fall down there. Anyway, so one of the really cool things about this is the problem is within this is that it's very difficult to kind of backtrack. Now, what you can do in this is you can actually search a user. So I can click on this specific user and I can see all the information on this user, every post that they've made. You can see here there's a lot of information there. So there's 4 pages of information, which is, fairly standard. Now, the thing is I wanted to be able to look at every conversation and be able to run sentiment analysis on that specific user to find out what kind of person they are. I want to understand them so that basically I can work out, are they playing me? Are they not playing me? What is the deal with this person and what are they trying to achieve? What's their agenda? And this is basically a really quite a cool thing. And obviously you can see here, now he's fairly invested into a single stock here. We can see it's only on one specific tag, which is a single stock. That's not the end of the world. It just means that we're just going to have that. So what we're going to do here is this piece of code scrapes all that goodness out. So one of the things I am using is I'm using the HTML Agility Pack. Now the HTML Agility Pack is a really cool tool that aids in web scraping. The thing that it really adds really powerful functionality to the table is you can use XPath querying to actually query your HTML for specific aspects of HTML. Essentially, you can so rather than doing string analysis, you're doing XPath. You're pumping it into XPath, and you're telling XPath to do the dirty work for me. So essentially here, let's go ahead and run this. I need to add the type and load it into memory. I've got a custom class here. This custom class is basically just a user post, and basically it contains the ID, which I haven't fully fleshed out, the tag, the subject, the URL, the number of replies, the number of views, the number of likes when it was posted, and the message. And the sentiment results will be passed on to this. You can see here there's a fair bit of code in here. So when there's a method here, you can see it's called convert to user post. I'm passing it an object from the HTML Agility Pack, and I'm passing it a HTML doc, which is essentially it's a parent object which is used to actually provide to actually select the specific HTML through XPath. So obviously I'm just creating some, just doing some housekeeping there. So I'm creating an object. So I've got user post. So I'm creating obviously this is a static method. So essentially here I've got docs, and I'm getting the tag information. So again, I'm just using a static HTML XPath query, and I'm just doing some funky string manipulation formatting on this. But essentially I'm just doing some string formatting, and it pretty much applies for the rest of them. I'm also doing a lot of cleanup for the subject data, because the subject data was really messy. So again, I'm just same process. I'm just doing string formatting and clearing up. So yep, and then basically we've got their responses. Same process. We're just basically doing XPath queries, and I'm just selecting those HTML strings. If there's an error, then there's an error. We're just going to dump it out, and then I'm formatting it in nicely. So then basically we're getting a nice response. And one of the things here, can you see with the message body, I'm actually then getting the actual URL. So I'm actually calling this function called getPostContent, which essentially is that it goes to the in here it goes to this specific URL and goes and pulls the entire, it pulls this message out of the body. That's really what that does. It's fairly basic, and you can see in here if we go to get post content, it's going to that URL. It's basically, I'm actually physically saying I'm Firefox as a user agent, and I'm actually hitting that endpoint, and then I'm selecting the message content, cleaning it up a bit, and then returning it. That's really it. That's pretty much it. So there is a parent class which is called user. Essentially, user is just providing a little bit more information about when they were first seen, when they last posted. So you can actually get a bit of a date range in terms of information there as well. So it's really great, quite handy for that. And the idea is that now, because I have a parent user, I can actually get multiple users, and I can actually start to build relationships and things like that. But enough of that. Let's actually go ahead and run it. That's actually probably the cool part. So let's go ahead and run this. So now it's prompting for a username. So let's actually pull this up, and let's actually pump in the.frac. And let's see what it does. So it's going to take a bit of time to run, because ultimately it needs to do a lot of subsequent. It's running synchronously. And firstly, I can retweak this to run asynchronously, but essentially it's just running synchronously. Now, one of the really cool things here is that obviously while this is running, we can just quickly go through the main code. Essentially, it's just hitting that user, querying that specific user, getting all its information, and then basically piping that information into that specific object. Now, the one thing it also does here is you can see this piece of code is actually it's getting all the pages. And this is actually quite cool. So it dynamically starts at page number 2, and it just continues to get pages until it reaches the page limit. So this essentially, if we go back here, it continually looks at all these pages, and it keeps going until it finds the limit. And that's really it. There's nothing really else that it does, but it's really quite cool. Alright, so that's completed. So we should actually be able to get... it has gotten sentiment, but I don't think that would have... Oh, it's hit a breakpoint. Where's hit my breakpoint? I think it's hit the breakpoint on the sentiment. That's fine. We're just going to stop it. So if we dump out user information here, we've got now a user information object. I've got this object here. Let's actually have a look at the posts. And you can see here, this has scraped all that information out of Hot Copper using that. So you can see here, this is the body, this is his discussions, all that kind of good stuff. Here we can see this is a number of replies, views, likes. This is all scraped, all 100% scraped out of Hot Copper. So this is a really cool functional demo on what Hot Copper, or what we can actually do with Invoke-WebRequest, and a little bit of tweaking. We can actually write some really powerful code and do some really cool stuff. So let's leave it there for the time being. Let's have an intermission for 5 minutes. I'm just going to chuck some music on. You guys can have a bit of a break. It's 7 o'clock here my time. We are running a little bit over, so we're going to probably have to scrap some demos. But we will see how we go. So we're going to have a quick intermission, and we will be back. So we're going to be back at, let's say, we'll be back in, let's give it a 2-minute intermission, and we'll be back then. All right, see you then. Oh, no, Mike. Okay, alrighty, we're back, and let's get stuck into REST. Alrighty, so let's get back into it, and we will keep cracking on. So, REST. No, we're not bludgers. REST. Let me just quickly get rid of this, get rid of this. We're gonna have to, I'm gonna have to speed through some of these demos, so we're just due to, I'm just trying to be aware of time. So, what is REST? REST basically stands for representational state transfer. REST is basically a web service architecture, which is basically used as an API. So essentially, it's an API architecture, and it's built over HTTP body and HTTP methods. So essentially, there's a lot of there is constraints with it. It was developed with HTTP 1.1 from HTTP 0. And there are some constraints, which is basically you have a client-server architecture, which means there are separation of two interfaces addressing security concerns. There are statelessness, so essentially there's no client context that's used. So you basically use Java JSON Web Tokens for authentication and OAuth 2.0. We're not going to go into that today because we just don't have time. OAuth might be something like a snap-on on another 101 live series. Cacheability. So cacheability, obviously, HTTP is cacheable, so we can cache things. It's obviously load balance. It's also able to be load balanced and things like that as well. So that's obviously offers a lot of advantages there. It also offers a uniform interface. So rather than formatting services, you can generally just stick to one, and you can basically provide, it's a single use interface. It really does simplify your endpoint process, so it's not really, yeah, it's pretty cool. That's basically REST. It's just simply just it's a web services architecture. It's not something that's really, yeah, it's not really that difficult. Essentially, it's just an API endpoint web architecture. One thing though is worth mentioning about REST is there's a lot of REST endpoints out there that basically are absolutely shocking, and I use that as a lightly. There are some out there that basically are so poorly documented, that are also very poorly written, that basically it's just not even worth using. We're going to be using some fantastic ones today with Philips Hue, but in this, it's just worth mentioning that that's the case. Now you guys hear me talking about JSON. JSON's essentially JSON's called JavaScript Object Notation, and essentially what it is, it's just an open source standard for file formatting. It uses clear readable text to transmit data between objects. JSON essentially is very, very basic. You within PowerShell you use convert to and from JSON to serialize and deserialize. We generally use the term serialize and deserialize. Serializes to convert an object into JSON, and deserializes to convert from an object, from a text into PowerShell as an object. That's essentially, we've just got a bit of a screenshot here. So you can see here we've got, I've got Invoke-REST method. I'm actually hitting a REST endpoint, and then basically I'm getting a JSON response back. And I've got a PowerShell object there, and we're actually converting that into JSON in this line here. And then basically here you can see this is formatted JSON, completely static text. You can actually store this as a file, perfectly fine. That's JSON. So let's quickly talk about using REST in PowerShell. So before we go any further, there are a couple of commandlets that you need to be aware of. So we've talked about convert to JSON and convert from JSON. The one is really important is basically Invoke-REST method. You don't use Invoke-WebRequest to actually do this. You use Invoke-REST method. Invoke-REST method is explicitly designed for REST, so it has a lot of useful features that basically aids in REST. So when you get a JSON response back, Invoke-REST method will automatically deserialize that response into PowerShell, so you don't actually even have to do that. A lot of really, really cool things there that it can do. Obviously down the bottom here we have XML. XML is, you can convert to and from XML. Obviously this is just the XML type that I've got declared there. And essentially what that is basically you can use XML over REST. Generally speaking, it's JSON or YAML. But predominantly it's JSON. XML is uncommon, but it's still worth mentioning. So let's go ahead and actually do some demos. So let's discard, let's jump into some demos. So here, we've got some demos. First thing we're going to do is we're going to do some convert to JSON. So what we've got here is we've got a PowerShell object which I've created. We're going to run this into memory. So this is just a standard PowerShell object that is as static as you got. We've got a whole bunch of different items within this. Now let's go ahead and serialize this into JSON. So now we've got some JSON code here. Let's go and pull this up to the top, and you can see here this is actually the serialized JSON. Now note the differences within JSON here. So we've got each of the property names is denoted before the value. So, and essentially your property value, so your key values, essentially are split with a colon. You can see that when there's multiple items, that's you have a comma. And then also, if you have a collection of items, whether that's an array, so this is an array here, and this is an actual collection, it's denoted by a square brackets. The others, when it's an object, it's basically denoted by a curly brace. And you can see here under the collection, so we actually remember up here we created a collection of objects. Essentially, we have the collection, which is obviously the property collection. And then here we've denoted, hey, this is a type array. And then basically we've described, then we have a curly brace to describe that that's an actual object. And that's pretty much it. And you can obviously see that it's separated by a comma. It's very, very basic. Now, and what we can do is we can actually deserialize that. So if we run that again, we've got our new object. So we can actually go ahead and then bring that back in. And that is basically straight out PowerShell. We can actually go ahead and recreate our collection. Very basic. That's PowerShell. So essentially that is serializing and deserializing with PowerShell. So with JSON. So let's go ahead and look at what's data types. Okay, yeah, I've done the same thing here. So essentially it's the same thing. Let's go ahead and look at the XML here. So we're going to have, I'm just going to run this collection. We're going to just run that. Just make sure that there's content there. Yep, perfect. And essentially what we can do is, so what I've done here is we're just doing a get child item, see Windows, file, and then I've just got selecting the full name, ID, and extension. I'm not doing any recursive querying here. We're just basically doing a static HTML, so it's pretty basic. So from that, essentially what we're doing now is we are then basically going to convert that to XML, and we're going to save that to a file. Oh, so we're not going to convert that to we're going to convert it to XML, and then we're just going to basically convert it into a string. So essentially here you can see this is my XML. It's pretty straightforward, and we're actually going to go ahead and try and save this as a string. So I'm just going to change that to D. Let's see if this works. Okay, the reason why this didn't work is I need to actually cast it as type XML. So let's go ahead and resave that and rerun that. Oh, no, I am going to do it. Convert to XML, like so. Let's see if that works. Yeah, because I did an out string there, so that was the reason why. So now I can actually save that file, so we can actually go ahead and let's have a look at that file. And here's the XML. So you can see here, straight XML. So you can serialize and deserialize with XML. Same thing with PowerShell. So that is XML. Pretty basic. So that is that. Let's go to our first REST method demos. So let's generate a basic REST method within PowerShell. So we've got our parameters here. So let's go ahead and run this. And we've got this random user.me.api endpoint. So essentially this is a random user endpoint generator. It just generates random users. Really, really quite handy when you need to build an Active Directory user farm really quickly. Oh, sorry, you need to build 1,000 Active Directory users for a demo. Very, very handy. So essentially here, we can actually then go ahead and run this. So let's go ahead and run this. So we're just doing a static URI. And we're doing a basic get. We're not doing anything complicated here. We're just doing a basic get. So let's actually have a look at the results. So the first thing we want to do is let's actually look at the type. And you can see here PowerShell's automatically decoded it as a PS object. So, oh sorry, it's deserialized the JSON as an object. So that's pretty straightforward. And let's actually have a look, and we can actually see in here, there's our results. We actually can start having a look around in here. So we can see there's an object. Let's just run get member, and we can see there's an object called a note property of results and info. So let's have a look at info first, actually. Let's see what's in there. So you can see here, this is the version, this is the results, this is the page. So a little basic information there. And let's have a look at results. And we've got a whole bunch of cool information. We've got a name called Ariana, last name Ray. Here's the information and location. This is the login information. You can see it just creates a random password. Very, very handy for just quickly building an Active Directory environment that you just need to spin up a whole bunch of information. And then you can basically get we've got a portrait, so we can actually, if we wanted to put that information into Active Directory, we can as well. So we can actually just go have a quick squiz at that. And you go, there's a photo. So essentially, this is really, really quite handy for. Obviously, this is a basic demo of REST, but you can see you can do some really cool integrations. So another one of the like I said, one of the ones I needed to use here was using this to create 1,000 users in Active Directory really quickly. Hit this API, give me 1,000 users, new 80 user, and then just pump all that information in. We're good to go. So that's Invoke REST method for a basic one. Now we're actually going to have a look at an advanced one, which is Invoke. We're going to look at Philips Hue. So I've got Philips Hue at home. We can see this light behind me. If it's actually, man, geez, it's like a 7-second delay. No, other side, that one, that green light. We're actually going to have some fun with it. Oh, I don't really want to log in. I think I actually do have the demo. I have the info, but essentially, Philips Hue, we've got the same thing. So we've got our Hue IP address. So let's go ahead and put that in. So 10.4.200.9. I think it is. Let me just quickly check my phone. Now the first thing I need to actually make sure is that that light turns on and off. Yep, perfectly, cool. So my Philips Hue can actually talk to it from downstairs, which is good. So I need to make sure that I know what bridge it's on. Yep, 10.4.200.9, perfect. Now for the guys that are trying to hack me, no, it's not allowed to talk to the internet. It's only accessible internally. So yeah. We're just going to go stream 5. And we're going to actually go ahead and run this, put this body in. So what this is first thing we need to do is we need to authenticate with our Hue controller. Hue actually uses physical security through a button press. So essentially, if you want to actually authenticate with the Hue controller and get an authentication key, you need to go and press the button. Now this is going to be fun because I actually have 15 seconds to run downstairs, press that button, and before it might be press the button and then run this. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's this one, but we're just basically going to run downstairs, hit the button, and then I'm going to run this again, and we should be fine. So I've got some code here, which we've basically got a URI endpoint, which is basically the Hue controller IP address. So we can actually see that. Let's just go ahead and see that. You can see just hitting that endpoint. Note that we're using a post. We're actually saying, hey, I want to authenticate. We're using a post. Now, I know this is a post because via the documentation, it gives you practical examples on how to actually log in. So when I talk about really good API endpoints, Philips Hue is one of the better ones because essentially you don't have to, it's very, very easy to use. It took me 20 minutes to write this demo, which comparatively to other demos is, yeah. And in the request body here, what do we actually have in the request body? Well, actually, you can see that we're converting it to JSON as well. So in the request body here, we've got the device type. So we're specifying, hey, this is my device, which is essentially just a phone. It's a anything, and I'm just calling it a PowerShell demo stream 5. And then basically we're explicitly saying the content type is application JSON. So I have 15 seconds to do this. I don't know if this is going to work, so I'm going to kind of get the door open. We're going to have some fun. I'm going to be running downstairs with my headset on, and we're going to see what happens. So first things first, I'm going to open the door. My child might run in and might say hello, but we will see how we go. So let's give this a go, and I will be back in a few seconds. Is that running? Yes, that's running. Alright, let's try and run downstairs and get this a little bit. Run the gauntlet of baby stuff. Oh. And I think I need to hit it again. I think it's the other way around. I think I need to actually press the button and then round the auth. Alright, let's see if we've got some user details. Yes, we've got a key. Perfect. Okay, so you can see here we've got a key. We are now authenticated with our REST. So we are authenticated with our REST endpoint. We've got a key and we are good to go. So let's have some fun. So the first thing I want to do is I want to have a look at all the lights. So we've got the lights endpoint. So essentially what I've done here is I've got a parameter block that I'm just going to splat some items in. We've got our URI. Let's have a look at our URI. URI. So you can see here, this is our URI, and you can see this is how Philips Hue does its authentication on its earlier thing. It doesn't support any sort of OAuth process. It's literally that. And you can see here also we've got our username in there as well, which is user details.success.username. What? Hang on one second. Yeah, okay, so it's technically on the username. Technically speaking, that's actually a key. But anyway. So essentially what's happening here now is we've got our username, we've got our thing, and we're doing a get. So now we're querying the Philips Hue API endpoint with our get. We're just getting information, and we want it all to be, make sure, we're going to be explicit, and we're going to be say we want it all to be in JSON. Because we want Invoke-REST method to be able to handle that. So let's go ahead and smash that, and we're going to now have a look at all our lights. So you can see here we've got a whole bunch of lights in our environment. We've got 7 lights in our Philips Hue environment at home. And the one we're going to be focusing on is light number 7. This is light number, yeah, that's light number 7 behind me. So we can actually start messing around with it. So let's get some information about that light. So we're going to hit the endpoint. We're just going to basically update the endpoint to point to light number 7. You can see we just hit lights, and now we're actually going explicitly to light number 7, and we're going to get all the information about it. So let's go ahead and run that. And now we've got our lights. Let's go have a look at the info. So you can see here it's called the lounge room 7. It's a color light. We can see the state of it. We know it's turned on. The brightness is 254. We've got a hue, saturation. We've got no effects on it. There's no alerts set on it. It's reachable, so it's good. We're in a good spot. You can see the type, the ID, the software version, all that kind of good stuff, which is really quite cool. Now let's actually go a little deeper into the state. So you can see inside the state here we have we're on a true. We've got the brightness 254, hue, saturation. So you can actually see it's all deserialized as PowerShell. As a PowerShell object, so we can just work with it, and it's fantastic. Now let's actually turn the light off. So what I've got here is I'm hitting the state. Again, this is documented, so you can just go to the documentation. I just can't be bothered logging in, but essentially you can go to the state URL endpoint, and we can actually specify the IP, and then in the body here we actually we got our IP and our username, so authenticated, and then in the body here we're basically saying the state of on is now going to be false. So we're turning the light off. And you can see there we're converting it the body of the HTTP request to be JSON. And here we're obviously being explicit. Hey, my body's JSON. Make sure you process a JSON. And here we have an interesting method. We're using the put method. Essentially the put method is saying, hey, I want you to do a partial change here, which essentially is the on. Now Philips Hue is really good. It really depends on a URL endpoints. Some of them want the entire object to be passed, so we're talking all of this, where others only just need the change. Philips Hue is really good at only process the change, so they've really got things right there. So let's go ahead and run it. And did I turn it on or did I turn it off? Now I gotta oh, there we go. It just turned off. Sweet. So you can see in the background there, that light turned off. We can actually turn it back on again. So let's go ahead and turn it on. Again, exact same request. The only difference is we're setting it to be true. So let's go ahead and do that. And voila. So essentially, that's Philips Hue. You can actually interact with your lights, and you can turn them on and off remotely via REST. Now, that's kind of boring, to be honest. We can actually do other cool things. This is a smart light, so we can actually have, it has a full, it can do whatever color you want. So let's change the color to be red. Let's do that. So I've just basically set my red color. We're going to actually specify that variable inside of here. And you can see here, again, with same URL endpoint, and basically we've got our IP address and our username. It's a put. We're basically wanting to turn it on. We're turning the brightness right up to the top, and we are going to have a 20-second transition time, but I'm not really that interested in 20 seconds. I'm going to set this to 5 seconds. We're going to set a transition time of 5 seconds, and we're going to have, is it 20 seconds or is it 20 milliseconds? Now I'm confused. I think it's in seconds. I don't think it's milliseconds. And again, we're doing a put. So let's change it to blue. Oh, no, red. Let's change our light to red. So let's go ahead and run that. And it's red. I actually kind of realized that I'm a little slow. My stream's a little slow. So you can see there we changed our light to red. So we can do some really cool things there. Again, we saw green, so I'm going to skip green. We can change it to blue. And you can see these values essentially are not. They're a color spectrum value. I can't remember what the exact thing is, but you can pretty much change whatever you want with them. So essentially, let's change them to blue, and that's blue. Did I change it to blue? Yep, I did. You're gonna change to blue? Oh, hang on, I might need to redo the body and then retry it. Let's try that. Does that work? It's not running. Why is you running to blue? Oh, I'm actually probably gonna need to put blue in memory, to be honest. Let's try that. There we go. There we go. Immediately blue. Perfect. And that's basically blue. So essentially, you can do really cool things. Now, we've got another really cool demo here. So we can actually do things with pings. So we've got 10.200.9. Okay, that's the actual endpoint of itself. And we can actually, let's have a hypothetical situation where we want to be able to ping and get notified if there's an endpoint that's down. So we've got a process running, and when we know that the server's down, we better go, oh, we better sort that out. So one of the things we can do here is we can actually use, there's a product in the API called an alert. Now basically an alert has different types of alerts you can have. This one I'm just going to use what we call the L select. I'm not going to go into too much detail. This is just more for the demos. And you can see here, again, we're using the same endpoint. We're setting the state of that light. And we're using the put. And this time we're actually specifying a hue of a completely random color. So I have no idea what color it's going to be. It's just going to be a completely random color. It's going to make sure it's on, and it's going to be at max brightness. And it's going to use the alert functionality. So it's going to basically, I think that alert basically flashes on and off for a couple of seconds. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. So if we go ahead and run this, you can see the IP endpoint exists. So we shouldn't get any flashing whatsoever there. That's perfectly fine until this IP endpoint doesn't exist. So 10.4.200.9 is the Philips Hue endpoint. So that's fine. And as you can see, if the ping's not result, ping succeeded, then we've got an issue. So let's go ahead. You can see there's no flashing. So let's go ahead and can that. Come on, can. I just did it. Do until forever. We can just can the entire session. Oh crap, we can't because I just lost my farmer's key. Oh no. Oh no. Oh, that's right. Which is re-authenticate. I might just quickly run downstairs and go and press that button again. Give me 2 secs. Alrighty. Alright. Alrighty, I just realised I need to make a quick slight change because there's a 5 there and I need to change that to a 6. Hopefully that's fine. Request body, yep. And authenticate. Please work, please work, please work. Pay dirt! Alright, we're back in business. Alright, so essentially what we got here is we're going to do now, we're going to change that IP to be something that doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just trying to find that code. Yep, okay, so let's make this 70. I don't think anything exists at 70. I just want to run a quick. I don't think anything exists at 70, so we can have a quick look there. Alrighty, so what we can do now is let's have a quick look. Definitely takes ages to run testnet connection. Man, it really does take ages. Didn't used to. Come on. I don't want to have to can you again. That was the slowest testnet. Okay, I think I'm going to do testnet because that's a little slower. So let's just assume that basically it's not working. Also, testnet connection is slow. I don't have time. So essentially, let's just assume the site's down. Oh, sorry, the server's down. So we can actually go ahead and run it. And you can see there, now it's actually sending an alert. So we can actually see the notification it's flashing. So you can do really cool things with a Philips Hue API. And it doesn't require much effort in terms of with REST. And in here you can see, like I said, we've got the body. We basically specified the alert, the hue, the on, the status of the light, the brightness, and then we just converted it to JSON. So that's pretty much that in terms of Philips Hue. So one of the things that it's done, let's just slow for 30 seconds, that's cool, is the final demo. So we can actually have some fun with lights. Philips Hue are really just built for home automation. You can do some really fun things. So let's go and flash some lights for fun. Let's just go and grab a song and let's add some music.
Yeah.
And so with Philips Hue, we can actually, yeah, you can pretty much
Unknown brain.
flash like crazy. Like we can do some really cool things. So let's give it a go.
I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming, it's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
I know that I gotta stay away from all your
And that is pretty much Philips Hue in a nutshell. So what you can do here is we can actually you can do a lot of automation with PowerShell and REST APIs. It's literally my bread and butter. So yeah, you can do crazy things with Philips Hue. You can do like if you can touch it with an API endpoint, you can do automation with it. So think about of all the different things you can do here. Hell, you know, you could literally integrate your Philips Hue with VirusTotal, and you know, so when you download a file, it uploads the VirusTotal, scans your file, and then basically you get a nice little flash on your Philips Hue whether the file is safe or not. So you can do things like that. You can do like, you know, if you get a Facebook notification or a Twitter notification, your Philips Hue could take, you know, send a flash notification to you. You could do, yeah, whatever you want. That's really the power of REST, and especially with PowerShell, it's incredibly powerful. So anyway, so let's leave that demo for there now. We're basically running a little late, so we're gonna basically have to kind of skip the next intermission, and we're gonna jump into SOAP. So soap, it's definitely not the stuff you clean with. And from a technology side, you do not want to get your computing wet. So SOAP basically stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. Essentially, it's a communication protocol that uses mainly HTTP for an endpoint for transport, and it's all based on XML. SOAP was basically the predecessor to REST. SOAP is still used today. PowerShell remoting uses SOAP. Anything under the hood with PowerShell remoting, when it's using WinRM, it's using SOAP. So essentially, SOAP is still here to stay. There's still a lot of really useful reasons to use SOAP. So it's not something that you either use REST, use SOAP. You basically use the API that's really appropriate to you. I'm not in any camp. I'm basically the kind of guy that's going to say, hey, use the technology that best fits your situation. REST has a lot of disadvantages, and the biggest one is the fact that REST requires a lot of querying. It can be very, very heavy in terms of HTTP traffic, and that can basically be detrimental to you, especially when you're trying to do multiple queries, and then you start hitting query limits and things like that. Yeah. Now, there are other APIs out there like GraphQL and things like that, which basically also mitigate that, and they're kind of like a hybrid between REST and SOAP, where you can maintain a state and you can query what you need, things like that. REST kind of does that, but essentially, yeah, it's really important to understand that basically SOAP is the predecessor. There's no real winner in terms of everyone was like, oh, SOAP's trash, use REST. Now everyone's like, REST is trash, use GraphQL. It's really, when you're choosing an API, choose the API that best fits your needs. Rob Cowley on Twitter did a really, really excellent talk on the NDC conference this year about this key issue. His Twitter always lights up about why people choose one technology over another. And at the end of the day, though, it's actually better to not choose a technology, because then basically you're not constraining yourself to limitations. Choose the technology that is applicable to you. Okay, so SOAP's basically it's fairly basic. It's like it has integrated authentication, so that's really advantageous. It doesn't rely on OAuth like on web tokens and things like that. It can actually integrate. Each SOAP request has its own integrated credentials or authentication. So within the SOAP message, or what with the SOAP body, we're just going to call it, it's generally the SOAP message, you have the envelope. The envelope basically declares the beginning or the end of the message. Within that, you'd also have the headers. So the headers are optional attributes of that message. Now, this is the body of your HTML. Just to reiterate, this is the body of your HTML. So essentially, you have your optional attributes. You have the XML data of your message. So your XML data could be whatever you wanted. It could be endpoint, it could be a username, it could be password, things like that. And then you have the fault. The fault's basically used to communicate errors. That's really it. It's very, very basic. Some acronyms to remember. So one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about. Oops, I'm gonna just go straight down there. Is the WSDL file. Call it a WSDL file. I call it WSDL. I love WSDL files, are my favorite files, especially within SOAP. WSDL files are basically stands for Web Services Description Language File. Essentially, it's a schema that details all the methods of that SOAP endpoint. You can use it for REST. There's other products out there like Swagger that do it better. But it's basically a schema that's really, really, really powerful. When using it with PowerShell and proxy functions, it's really, really good. And a WSDL file allows you the use of a proxy function. A proxy function essentially is it's a function. It's basically a proxy function is something that sits in between you and your endpoint. So a WSDL file will create a whole bunch of methods and things like that associated. When you connect to PowerShell and you connect to that WSDL file, when you're using PowerShell to connect to your SOAP API endpoint with the WSDL file, essentially it'll create a whole bunch of proxy functions that you can actually use to interact with it on behalf of PowerShell. So rather than actually have to manually create the request itself, you can basically just use the function and it'll do it for you. So it's a really, really handy way, and it simplifies your code so much. Soap is one of those ones that it's just, oh my god, Soaps is a very, very painful protocol or API to deal with if you're writing raw SOAP requests. We're going to have a look at that. And then when using SOAP with a PowerShell, use the proxy functions in a WSDL file. We're going to actually have a look at a WSDL file. Very, very interesting stuff. So what's the deal? Like I said, well, so WSDL files, essentially they provide a means to the client to dynamically create their proxy classes without actually having to interact with the endpoint directly. Essentially, you can think of it as, we're going to use an example of a restaurant. So think of it as you go to the restaurant and you look at the menu. The menu is the WSDL files, okay? Then you decide what you want to order. So let's think you want to order the lasagna, you want to order the wine, and you want to order the tiramisu. Obviously, this is an Italian restaurant, but essentially, you're going to order your lasagna, your wine, and your tiramisu. This is where you'll be creating your proxy functions based on the WSDL. So rather than saying, and then when you order from that menu, and you call the respective service methods using SOAP, essentially you're actually just using those methods. So think of the method as order the lasagna. It would be, get lasagna would be a method. Wine would be, order lasagna, order wine, and order tiramisu. And so then rather than having to basically say, I want to get each individual SOAP request and manually craft it, you can basically just say, I want these methods. And it's really, really, really handy to have. Having WSDL files really simplifies the process, and it makes it a lot easier. So we're going to jump on the next slide. This is kind of a really good example of how it kind of all sits together. So we have our PowerShell. PowerShell, obviously on our left-hand side, we call the method. This is us actually calling the method. So rather than actually having to write an Invoke-WebRequest method, we just call the method. And this is going to make a lot more sense when you see the demo, just FYI. So we call the method. Then here, when we call that method, what happens is PowerShell goes to the proxy class. And this is the method here. And what it does is the proxy class is dynamically created. It automatically raises and sends the SOAP request and then handles the response. And obviously this is the SOAP request. So essentially it acts as, it is a proxy between us and SOAP. We don't interact with SOAP, we just interact with the proxy. It makes life so much easier, especially within SOAP, using proxy classes. So I cannot emphasize this enough. So let's go ahead and erase all the ink. Let's jump into a demo, guys. Let's jump into a demo. And I think that's actually our very last demo for today. So let's go into, let's actually have a quick look at a WSDL file. So I've got a WSDL file. This is an endpoint for, let me just quickly go here firstly. This is a WSDL, this is a SOAP endpoint by, what's his name? Actually, no, it really hasn't published his name. But essentially, you can see here he's got a SOAP endpoint here, which is ASMX. You can get the daily Dilbert images, or you can go query a specific Dilbert image, and it'll go fetch it for you. It's basically just a simple SOAP endpoint. And what we're going to do here is, you can see here we've got today's Dilbert, and you've got a whole bunch of information on how to actually query it. We've got SOAP 1.1 and SOAP 1.2. But yeah, that's pretty much how we query it. Very basic. You can see here, this is the SOAP body. I'm actually just going to zoom this in a bit so you guys can all see this. You can see here there's a SOAP body. You can see this is what your SOAP request should look like. Cool. Let's go ahead and actually have a look at this. So what I've got here is I've got an XML SOAP body, which again is just literally just a copy and paste of that SOAP body. It's just stored in XML. So I want to get today's Dilbert, and you can see here that's pretty much the same. Like, they're pretty much the same. That's my SOAP body. Nothing special. And so what we've got here in our demo is we've got I've got an endpoint. So I'm going to just quickly run that, put that endpoint into memory. And then we've basically got our parameters. So I'm going to splat in our parameters into Invoke-WebRequest. We're not using Invoke-REST method. Remember, Invoke-REST method is for a REST, not SOAP. And so here what we have is we've got our parameters, we've got our URI, our body. So our body is just basically our XML body. I'm just running in get content. That's nothing special. And then in our URI, I'm just basically specifying the dilbert.asx at the ASMX endpoint. So we're actually hitting this specific endpoint. So from that, this is how we actually create it. Now, this is a very, very basic SOAP request. Let's go ahead and run that, and you can see, let's bring this up, we're going to get a response. Now the response we're going to get is to do with SSL. So you can see here, if we have a look, we can see that we've got a 200 status okay, so we know that our SOAP query was fine. We can actually go have a look at the content, and you can see here SOAP request couldn't do it, so we can actually repass that as XML. So let's go ahead and pass that as XML. I'm actually just going to copy that into memory like so, and we can actually go and have a squiz at it, and yeah, we can actually, you know, have a look at it. So we can actually have a look back in the envelope, and you can see here we've got our SOAP, we've got a whole bunch of information about it. It's fairly straightforward. Let me just run a quick get member, see what properties. So you can see here we've got the body, we've got the SOAP, XSD, XSI. So let's quickly have a look at the body. We can see, let's go look at today's Dilbert response. Today's Dilbert result. Oh, okay, we can't go that far because of the line issue with PowerShell, so we're just going to do it in here. What's it called? Today's Dilbert result. Let's go see what we get here. And you can see here, web accession is thrown, messages, request is aborted, could not create SSL TLS secure channel. This is because, like I said before, he's trying to, the guy, the author who's actually created this is trying to actually authenticate with, obviously he's trying to connect to the endpoint, but they've updated their SSL endpoint so that it's not using SSL anymore, it's using TLS. So he just needs to update that and that'll work. But that's basically that. That's how we actually craft an initial SOAP request using Invoke-WebRequest. Now let's do it using proxy classes. So literally, we're going to use web service proxy to do this, and we're just going to specify URI. Now, using web service proxy, you can put your credentials. So if you need to actually pass credentials, all that kind of stuff, you use web service proxy. There's a lot of cool stuff it has. So we might as well just run a get help on new web service proxy. Now, it's not supported in PowerShell 7, so I'm actually going to have to copy and paste this into an IC, and we will have a look at it in here. So if we go ahead and run get help on it, you can see there's going to be a ton of good stuff here about what it does. So look, like I said, it's just essentially it's a web service proxy. Let's just go full. I want all that goodness. So you can see here we've got a ton of good information about it. So you can see here you can use web service proxy, creates a .NET framework proxy using the US zip service and Windows PowerShell. Very, very basic. And we can then do stuff with it. So essentially, it's exactly right. You can then run get member, and you can enumerate all the methods from that. It's very, very basic. It makes SOAP work so much easier to use. It's not funny. And then we can see here we're querying it, getting info, and we're querying a method, and then we're getting a response back. So let's actually go ahead and run that. So we're going to run today's Dilbert. So we're connecting to the web service proxy. We've now authenticated. So again, we can actually run get member on that. So let's actually do that. And there'll be two methods there. Will be today's Dilbert, and we have today's Dilbert, and where is it? And today's deal bit async. So we actually got a few there. We've got today's deal bit, we've got end daily deal bit, and today's deal bit, daily deal bit, async. So begin daily deal bit. So there's a lot in there. But what we're going to be using is just today's deal bit. We're going to be using the today's deal bit method, and that is it. And we're going to run that, and you can see we get the response back, and it says, hey, sort your SSL life out. And that is literally that. So compared to actually crafting the message, using web service proxies is one of the best things you can do. And like I said, when you're using new web service proxy, it's connecting to the WSDL file, and it's creating those proxy functions to communicate with that endpoint. So like we said, let's have a look at that WSDL file. And essentially, this is a WSDL file. So you can see here, it's just a straight XML file that provides all the methods and all the required methods and endpoints that it needs to hit to be able to actually achieve that. And that is it. That is SOAP, and it's with PowerShell. Like I said, use the web service proxy. Always use the web service proxy unless you have a reason why not to, which is very, very hard to understand why not. But there would be some reasons out there that would prohibit you from using it. But essentially, if you don't want to have to actually craft the request like so, 10 lines versus literally 1 line, or 2 lines to query it, that's it. So I think that's pretty much it for today. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today, actually. I think there's nothing else. Does anyone have any questions? Throw them in the chat. Yeah, throw them in the chat and we'll give it a go. Oh, a message. Any questions? Alrighty. Alright, I think we're going to leave it there for today. If you have any further questions, you can just tweet me out on Twitter. So obviously my Twitter's below on Twitch. You can also just send me a chat. G'day Anthony, it's good to see you, mate. Congratulations on graduating. And we'll see you in the big world of IT. But if you've got any questions or anything, you can obviously feel free to tweet them out. A lot of really cool stuff there. If you've got any REST queries or any REST questions that you've burning REST questions, you can definitely tweet them out to me. I'm happy to answer them. There's really, yeah. REST is definitely my bread and butter. So if you've got any questions or anything, you can definitely ask and fire them out. But anyway, I have to end this now because I have to get in the car and go driving very, very soon. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for the holler, Anthony. It's good to see you, mate. Hope to see you next time, mate. If you're in the neighborhood. Next week's going to be PowerShell and logging. Maybe I might push that one back, and I might be doing Pesta. Yeah, I'm going to do Pesta next week. So we're going to be looking at unit testing with PowerShell next week. So essentially this is going to be just a basic introduction into PowerShell unit testing. We're going to be doing cool. You too, mate. We're going to be doing unit testing with PowerShell, and then the following week we will be doing PowerShell and logging, and I think that's pretty much it. I'm just going to have a quick squeeze. What's in the to-dos? PowerShell 101 Live lessons in this curriculum, and then I think we're really close to the end of it now. And yeah, so we've got logging and testing your code, and then configuration as code. I don't think I'm going to be able to teach configuration as code. It's not something that I'm fully aware of, and I'm not going to be able to properly teach it. But I can definitely still teach. We can definitely teach logging that. So configuration as code might be in an advanced course, and I might get somebody else to actually teach DSC. And we might do a cross stream for that. But yes, definitely next week will be testing, and then the following week will be logging, and I think we will conclude it there, and that will be it. So next week will be Christmas week, and then we'll be finishing on the 4th of January. And yeah, we will be back at the same time for next year. So also for next week, which will be at 9 AM rather than 6. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, leave a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the content. It's really, really good. And yeah, hope to see you guys next time. Anyway, bye for now.